A grieving widower hired her to cook for his 11 children. She never once let any of them go hungry. The first morning she showed up, I was standing at the stove burning oats. Third time that week I'd burned them. The pot had a black ring inside it that no amount of scrubbing was going to take out, and I knew that, and I kept using it anyway because I had 11 mouths to feed and no time to locate a second pot, and no money to buy one and no wife anymore to tell me where anything was kept. Cecilia had been gone 8 months, fever. 3 days from fine to gone, and I wasn't ready for any of it. Not the dying, not the burying, not the morning after the burying when I walked back into the kitchen. And all 11 of them were sitting at the table waiting on breakfast like the world hadn't just ended. I put water on to boil. I didn't know what else to do. 8 months of that, getting better at it the wrong way, learning what I could burn and still have them eat it, what I could skip and still have them stay on their feet. Jesse, my oldest, was 13. He started waking up before me to tend the fire. I didn't ask him to, he just started doing it. 12 years old, 13, and already reading the same look on my face that I used to see on my father's face. That look of a man holding something together by pure refusal to let go. I put a notice up at the feed store, cook wanted, family of 12, 2 miles east on the Alderman Road, wages discussed. 3 women came to look. The first one took one look at the house and the number of children and said her back wasn't up to it. The second asked what happened to my wife, and when I told her, she got a kind of calculating look that I didn't care for. The third was Nora Pell. She came on a Tuesday. I remember that because I'd just gotten back from town with a sack of flour and a broken axle bolt I needed to fix before the wagon came apart entirely, and I walked around the side of the barn and there was a woman standing in my yard looking at the place like she was appraising it. Not the house, the yard, the fence line, the garden plot Cecilia used to keep, which had gone to weeds since April. She was looking at all of it the way a person looks at work that hasn't been done yet. She was maybe 40, dark hair going gray at the temples. She had the hands of a woman who'd worked most of her life and hadn't minded it. "You're early," I said. She turned around. "I'm exactly on time, you said noon." I looked at the sun, she was right. "Come inside," I said. She followed me in and didn't say a word about the state of the kitchen, which was something in her favor right off. She just looked at it. Looked at the pot on the stove, the stack of dishes, the sack of beans on the floor that one of the little ones had knocked over and which I hadn't gotten around to picking up yet. She looked at it all, and then she looked at me. "How many children?" 11. Ages? 13 down to 2. A pause, "And you're managing the ranch as well." "Trying to." She pulled out a chair at the table and sat down without being asked, which I took to mean she was serious. "What happened to your wife, if you don't mind my asking?" "Fever 8 months ago." She looked at the window for a moment, then she looked back at me. "My husband was a sheep rancher over near Billings, kicked by a horse 3 years ago. Didn't die right away, which was the harder part." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. "What are you offering?" she said. I told her the number. It was low and I knew it. She knew it too, I could see that, but she didn't negotiate. She just said, "When do you need me to start?" "Now would suit me," I said. She stood up. She picked up the sack of beans off the floor without making a thing of it and set it on the shelf. Then she found the second pot, the one I hadn't been able to locate, hanging behind the door on a hook I'd somehow never noticed, and she filled it from the bucket and put it on the stove. "Send the children in for supper at 6, she said. "And get me a list of what you're short on. I'll need it for Saturday." That was how it started. I want to say something about 11 children, because people hear that number and they get a look on their face, either admiringly stupid or like they think it's a joke. It's neither. It's just what happened year by year, Cecilia and me, and we didn't set out to have 11 exactly. That's just where we ended up by the time we'd been married 15 years. 2 of them weren't ours by blood, Cecilia's sister's boy, Hank, who came to us at 4 when her sister died, and a girl named Ruth who'd been left at the church in Haverford and who Cecilia had brought home one February without much discussion. 11, 2 rooms for sleeping and 1 main room and the kitchen. In winter they were stacked like cordwood. In summer they were everywhere at once, and the noise never stopped from before sunup to well after dark, and I used to stand outside in the evening sometimes just to hear the quiet, and Cecilia would come find me and stand next to me without saying anything, and after a while we'd go back inside together. I missed that quiet. I missed having someone to stand in it with me. Nora started arriving at 5 in the morning. I'd be up by 4:30, already out in the barn, and when I came in at first light, she'd have the fire going and coffee on, and whatever was for breakfast in some stage of being made. She didn't talk much in the mornings. Neither did I. We had a kind of agreement about that without ever discussing it. The children figured out within the first week that she wasn't someone to try things with. Not mean about it, she wasn't mean. But she had a way of looking at a child who was misbehaving that was more effective than any amount of shouting. My youngest, Clara, who was 2 and had been my particular worry since Cecilia died because she was too small to understand why her mother wasn't there, took to Nora inside of 3 days. Just walked up to her one morning and held up her arms. Nora bent down and picked her up without stopping what she was doing, just shifted her to one hip and kept going, and Clara put her head on Nora's shoulder, and that was that. I watched that from across the room and felt something complicated that I didn't examine too closely. The food got better fast. That sounds simple, but it wasn't. Feeding 11 children 3 times a day on the budget I had was a kind of engineering, and Nora turned out to be very good at engineering. She kept a running count of what we had, what we were going to need, what could be stretched. She started the garden plot again in late August, which I hadn't asked her to do and wasn't part of what I was paying her for. I came around the house one evening and found her and my older girls, Martha and June, out there on their knees pulling weeds, and all 3 of them were talking and laughing about something I hadn't heard. I stood at the corner of the house for a moment watching them. Martha was 14, old enough to have been carrying a weight since Cecilia died that I'd seen but hadn't known how to address. She'd been quiet, doing her part without complaint and quiet in a way that worried me. Out there in the garden plot, she wasn't quiet. She was laughing at something Nora had said, and her whole face was different. I went back to the barn. I had work to do. September came, and with it the kind of trouble that tends to come in September on a ranch. A section of fence down, 2 calves sick, a leak in the roof over the boys' room that I'd been aware of since July and hadn't had time to fix. I was spread thin, and I knew it. Jessie was a help, more help than I had any right to ask of a 13-year-old boy. But there's only so much a boy that age can do, and only so much a father ought to ask. One night I came in late, dark already, the children all in bed, which meant it was past 9, and Nora was still at the table with a lamp going and a piece of paper in front of her. I thought she was writing a letter. She wasn't. She was going over the food accounts. "You don't need to do that," I said. She looked up. "I found a place in Bremen that sells flour 3 cents cheaper per bushel than the feed store, and there's a woman named Kate's on the South Road whose husband died and who's got a milk cow she can't keep. If you bought it, she'd take payments." I pulled out the other chair and sat down. I was dirty and tired, and I smelled like cattle, and I was too tired to be embarrassed about any of it. "We're tight right now," I said. "I know. I can see the accounts," she said it matter of fact, not unkind. "I'm telling you there are ways to be less tight." I looked at the paper. She'd written down numbers, the flour price, what we'd save in a year, what the cow would cost, what it would save us in bought milk over a winter. The handwriting was neat, practical. She'd done this the way she did everything, without fuss, because it was useful. "Your husband," I said, "did he run a good operation before?" She was quiet for a moment. "Yes, he did. When he was well, he was a good man at it." A pause. "I kept his accounts. He didn't have much patience for the numbers." Cecilia was the same. Better with numbers than me. Nora folded the paper and pushed it across the table. "Think about the cow." "I can negotiate with Mrs. Cates if you'd rather not." I picked up the paper. Then I said, without quite meaning to, "You know you don't have to work like this." She looked at me, just looked at me with a kind of steadiness that I'd noticed from the start but couldn't quite name. "Mr. Alderman," she said, "I come here every morning and I see what you're holding together. I know what it costs." She stopped. Then she said, "Yes, I do have to work like this. That's what I'm here for." I didn't say anything. After a while, I said good night and took the lamp and went to bed, and I lay there a long time looking at the ceiling before I slept. The thing about holding a household together after your wife dies is that no one sees the whole of it. Your neighbors see you at church and at the feed store and they say you're managing well, which is kind of them and means nothing. Your children see you at the table and at bedtime and in the barn, and what they see is that things keep going, which is what they need to see, but they don't see what it costs to keep things going. They can't. their children. You go to sleep at night with a list running in your head: the fence, the calves, the leek, the flour, the boots that 2 of the boys have outgrown, the winter wood that needs to be cut and split and stacked before November, and you wake up with the list still running because it didn't stop while you slept. There was no one to tell any of this to. That was the part that wore on me more than the work itself. Cecilia and I used to talk in the evenings, not much, sometimes just a few minutes before sleep, but we'd go over the day and what was coming and what was worrying us, and there was something in having another person hold the list with you, even for a few minutes, that made it possible to put it down. I had nobody to put it down with. I don't say this for pity, I'm just telling you how it was. October brought the first cold. The roof leak over the boys' room got worse with the rain, and I got up on a Saturday morning and climbed up there myself, while Jesse and my second boy, Tom, handed tools up, and I was up there for 3 hours in the cold getting it sorted. When I came down, Nora had coffee and food waiting, and she didn't say a word about the wet and the cold. She just handed me the mug. "Hank's been coughing," she said. "I know, I'll look at him tonight. I made a mustard plaster. It's in the kitchen." I looked at her. She'd made a mustard plaster. For a boy who wasn't her child, who she'd known for 2 months, who she was not paid to look after beyond feeding him. She'd made a mustard plaster and left it in the kitchen in case I needed it. I didn't say anything. I drank the coffee. That night I rubbed it on Hank's chest, and he coughed less by morning and was fine within a week. The second time trouble came in a form I hadn't anticipated. There's a man in the county named Rourke, runs cattle on the East Range, been doing it for 20 years. The kind of man who takes up more space than he's entitled to and does it so naturally you almost don't notice. He'd been grazing his stock on a strip of my land along the creek since before Cecilia died, and I'd let it go because I had bigger concerns, and because starting a fight with Rourke wasn't something I wanted to add to the list. In October, he decided that my letting it go meant I'd given it to him. He rode up on a Wednesday with 2 of his hands and told me as much, standing in my yard while I was mending harness. Told me the strip along the creek was his now, that he'd been using it and I clearly wasn't, and that he figured it was past time to make that official. I set down the harness. I'd known men like Rourke all my life, the kind who read a tired man's tiredness as an invitation, who see the weight someone's carrying and decide that makes them easy. "No," I said. He blinked. I don't think he'd expected that. "No," I said again. "That's my land. You know it's my land. Your cattle have been grazing on it with my allowance, and that allowance is revoked. Get them off by Friday." One of his hands shifted on his horse. Rourke's face went through a few things before it settled. "You've got a lot of children to feed," he said. It wasn't quite a threat. It was something worse, a reminder. "I'm aware of how many children I have," I said. "Friday." I held his eyes. He held mine. After a moment, he pulled his horse around and rode out without another word, his hands behind him. My hands were steady. My heart was doing something else, but my hands were steady. I went back inside, and Nora was at the stove. She'd heard all of it through the door. The window was open. It was a warm day for October. She didn't look up. "That'll hold him," she said. "Probably." "It'll hold him," she said, with a certainty that I hadn't felt. I looked at the back of her head, at the way she stood at that stove, straight, deliberate, like she'd been standing at stoves in the middle of difficult things her whole life, and had decided years ago that the difficult things didn't get to win. "You should have seen your face," she said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite amusement. "What about it?" "He knew. Soon as you said no the second time, he knew." I didn't say anything. After a while, she put a plate on the table and said, "Eat. You've still got fence work this afternoon." I want to tell you about November, because November was when things shifted. Not in a way either of us named or talked about. The shift happened the way most things happen on a ranch, quietly, because everybody was too busy to make a ceremony of it. She'd been coming for 4 months. The children had rearranged themselves around her in the way children rearrange themselves around anything reliable, taking it for granted, which meant trusting it, which was the highest compliment they knew how to give. Martha had started helping with the cooking without being asked. Jesse had started talking at the supper table again, which he'd mostly stopped doing after Cecilia died. Clara still called her Nora, but she said it the way she said Papa, like it was a person who was just supposed to be there. I noticed all of this. I didn't say anything about it. November brought early snow. One evening Nora was putting on her coat to go. She drove a small wagon, went back to a room she rented from a widow in Haverford, and the snow had picked up outside, hard and sideways. I said, "You shouldn't drive in that." She looked at the door, then she looked at me. "There's a spare room," I said. "End of the hall, it's not much, but it's dry." She was quiet. In those 4 months, I'd learned a few things about her silences. This one was the kind where she was thinking through a thing carefully before she answered. "That would be practical," she said. "It would." She took off her coat. I showed her the room. It had a narrow bed and a chest and a window that rattled when the wind came up, which it did all night. I brought in an extra blanket from the closet, one of Cecilia's quilts, the one with the blue pattern, and I put it on the foot of the bed without thinking, and then I stood there a moment holding the corner of it, and Nora was standing just behind me. She said quietly, "I know you're not replacing her." I let go of the quilt. "No." "Good," a pause. "Neither am I." I turned around. She was looking at me with that steadiness I'd been watching for 4 months and hadn't been able to name. Now I thought I could name it. It was the look of a person who understood what it cost to hold things together, who'd been watching somebody do it, and who'd decided it was worth watching. "We're both just people," she said, "trying to get through." "That's about right," I said. She nodded once, like something had been settled, and sat down on the bed to take off her shoes. I said good night and pulled the door to and stood in the hallway for a moment listening to the wind in the window and the snow against the glass. She didn't go back to Haverford. Not that night and not the night after. She sent word to the widow she rented from, arranged for her things to be brought over, and by December she was sleeping in the end room and had been there long enough that nobody in the house thought to remark on it. I want to be straight with you about what it was and what it wasn't. It was not a romance, not at the start. It was 2 tired people in the same house in the middle of winter who had learned that the other one was reliable, and reliability is not nothing. It's not nothing at all. After Cecilia died, I would have told you that love was a particular feeling in a particular body that either came or didn't, and I would have been right, but I would have been missing half of it. The half where you watch someone make mustard plasters for your sick boy at 6 in the morning, and speak plainly about hard things, and stand steady when a man like Rourke comes to your yard to see if you'll break. The half that builds. We had a conversation in January. I say conversation, it was about 3 minutes, not long but long enough. I was coming in from the barn and she was at the stove and I said, without any particular lead-up, "You know you don't have to stay." She turned around and looked at me. "Mr. Alderman," she'd been calling me that for 6 months, "do you want me to leave?" "No." "Then I'll stay." I stood there with snow melting off my boots. It's not easy. "I know what it is." "The children." "I know what the children are." She turned back to the stove. "Go change your boots. Supper's in 20 minutes. I went and changed my boots. She called me Caleb for the first time that March. Don't know what occasion. She just used it in the middle of something else, passing me the salt maybe, I don't remember. But I remember hearing it. I remember the way it sat in the air for a moment, my name and her voice, and neither one of us made anything of it, but it changed something. Spring came. The calves came healthy. The fence held. The roof stayed dry through the February storms. The garden plot Nora had started in August produced enough in the fall that we had some put up, and by March it was already greening at the edges again. Martha and June were out there before school, which I would not have predicted 6 months before. I want to tell you about one evening in April. The children were in bed, all 11 of them, which on a calm night was a kind of miracle. The house was quiet, really quiet, not just between bouts of noise, and Nora and I were at the table, not talking, just sitting. She had some mending. I had the account book. The lamp was low. After a while she said, "Jesse's going to be a good man." I looked up. "Yeah." "You did that?" I didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you something you don't know," she said. "I'm just saying it out loud because I think you should hear it." I put the account book down. Outside the window I could see the yard in the moonlight, the fence I'd mended, the garden plot, the barn where I'd been working since before sunup. 11 children sleeping in the house behind me. A woman across the table who'd driven 2 miles in October snow and stayed. "You've been good for them," I said. We've been good for them. She looked up from the mending. Together. Together, I turned the word over. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Just the once, just for a moment, and she went still under it and let it stay. Her hand was warm and a little rough, and her eyes didn't waver when they met mine. She said, "Don't make it more complicated than it has to be, Caleb." "I know," I said. "You're a good man. You built all of this." She glanced at the walls of the house, at everything they contained. "I just want to stay in it, if that's all right." It was more than all right. But I didn't say that either, because she'd have told me I was making it complicated. I just kept my hand on hers for another moment, and the lamp burned low, and outside the moonlight lay flat and white across everything I'd held together through a year of trying. We married the following October. Quiet, just the children and a preacher and a neighbor woman as witness. Jessie stood up for me. Martha stood up for Nora. Clara, who was 3 by then, sat on Jessie's boots during the whole ceremony, and he let her. There's not much more to say about that day. It wasn't a grand thing. It wasn't meant to be. What I'll tell you is what I remember about that night, after the preacher had gone, and the neighbor woman had gone, and the children were in bed. Nora and I sat at the table again. Our table, by then, it had been our table for a year, and the house was quiet around us. She looked at me across the lamp and said, "You're going to worry about this for the rest of your life." "Probably." "Good," she said it the way she said most things, straight and without apology. "A man who doesn't worry is a man who isn't paying attention." I said I paid attention. "You did." She stood up and took the lamp. "That's why I'm here." She went down the hall toward the room that was ours now. I sat a moment longer. The house around me held 11 children sleeping, a garden plot coming back to life for the second year, a barn with sound animals in it, accounts that were no longer desperate, a roof that didn't leak, a fence that held. I'd built all of it and held all of it, and there had been a year in the middle where I wasn't sure I was going to manage it. And I had managed it. And now there was a woman down the hall who'd watched me do it and chosen to stay anyway, not out of need or desperation or charity, but because she'd looked at everything I was and decided it was worth her time. I got up and turned down the stove and blew out the last lamp and went down the hall. Outside the window, the October dark lay over the whole valley, the creek strip that Rourke had never gotten, the range where the calves were sleeping, the road that came in from the west, and that nobody was coming up anymore at night looking for trouble. I lay down beside her in the dark. The wind picked up somewhere out past the barn. She was already asleep, her breathing slow and even, and I lay there listening to it and to the quiet of the house and to the particular silence of a man who has everything he needs and knows it and isn't going to forget it. That's the whole of it,